Good afternoon. Thanks for joining Family Caregiver Alliance for 5 tips for improving a difficult caregiving day. I'm Calvin Hu, Education Coordinator at FCA and your host. For 4 decades, FCA has been working across the Bay Area and the nation to improve the well-being of family caregivers. We offer support through consultations, classes, workshops, publications, retreats, research, and advocacy. If you'd like to learn more about us or access our online resource center, FCA Care Journey, please visit us at caregiver.org. Now for some quick housekeeping. During the webinar, your phones or mics are going to be muted. If you have any questions, you can ask them by using the chat-style question box on your screen. We also have received your questions from the registration form, so for this webinar, we've reserved about half the time for questions, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the formal presentation. If you do have to leave early, we archive all our webinars. They can be viewed later on caregiver.org. Finally, we're going to be asking you if you might be able to give us a little bit of feedback after the webinar ends. We use these to help shape future education programs, so I'd like to thank you all in advance for filling those out as we do read all your comments. So today I'd like to welcome our guest, Lindsey Vajpeyi. Lindsey has earned degrees in sociology and gender studies, holds an activity director certification with a specialization in memory care, has an Alzheimer's Association Essentials plus Dementia Advanced Care certification, and was previously a certified master trainer for the Best Friends approach to Alzheimer's care. She has experience in both activities and wellness in long-term care, as well as in programs and services at a large nonprofit. Essentially, Lindsey's entire career has basically been dedicated to working with persons living with dementia and, of course, their caregivers, with a particular focus on improving quality of life for all those affected by dementia. Currently, Lindsey is Director of Education and Outreach at Insight Memory Care Center. This is in Fairfax, Virginia. So now that you know a little bit more about our guest, I'd like to turn things over to Lindsey.
Thank you, Calvin, and hello everyone out there. Welcome to today's program, 5 Tips for Improving a Difficult Caregiving Day. So who here has sometimes had a bad day? A day when it's difficult to be the caregiver that you really want to be. Even though I can't see your hands raised, I'm going to venture a guess that many of you have experienced this, and maybe today is even one of those days. So in the next half hour, we're going to review some common changes. Cue Calvin, turn page. We're going to review some common changes experienced by a person living with dementia, the effects of caregiving on your health, and 5 practical tips for reducing your stress as a caregiver. And in the end, hopefully this information, and especially the 5 tips, will help make your day a little less stressful and maybe even a little bit more enjoyable. Next. So before we jump into the main program, I always like to start with a few words about dementia to make sure we're all on the same page. Dementia isn't a specific disease. It's a word that we use to describe a group of symptoms that affect thinking, language, and social abilities. And these symptoms are severe enough to interfere with a person's daily life. So this isn't normal aging, which might include some minor cognitive changes. Dementia is something that truly gets in the way of daily life. Next. You can think of dementia as an umbrella term. So in this picture on the left, we have a list of the most common types of irreversible dementia. So you're probably familiar with Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common form of dementia. However, there are actually over 100 different types of dementia. And on the right, you see a list of reversible causes. So like the things on this list, depression, infections, brain tumors, metabolic disorders, those sorts of things can produce symptoms that look like dementia, but they're actually treatable or reversible. Next. So though each type of dementia is a little bit different and each person is different, there are some common changes that happen in all dementias. Most people think of progressive memory loss for those who have dementia, beginning with short-term memory loss in the early stage and progressing to long-term memory issues by the late stage. In the early stage of Alzheimer's, for example, this is the primary warning sign, though the early stage symptoms may be different for some other forms of dementia. Language problems become common, such as having difficulty participating in a conversation, word finding, not fully understanding what others say or mean, and having difficulty with things like reading and writing. Impaired abstract thinking is common. When you think of something abstract like the concept of time, That becomes a difficult concept for a person living with dementia. What does 1 hour mean? 1 week? It isn't easy to understand when the person living with dementia is thinking in more concrete terms. You may have noticed poor judgment and reasoning with your loved one, making bad decisions with things like money management and driving. It also becomes nearly impossible to reason with a person living with dementia. Their brains just don't work in that way any longer. And you might notice difficulty with impulse control, the person losing their filter when speaking, reacting by instinct. You can say 100 times, don't touch the cookies on the counter, but if that person walks by and they see one, you better believe they're going to take one. The person living with dementia has poor coping skills. When they're stressed or having a bad day, they're just less able to cope with those things. If I, with a healthy brain, am frustrated by something, I can bite my tongue, I can take a few deep breaths, I can do whatever is needed to get through the moment in a socially appropriate way. For the person living with dementia, they're losing those skills to cope with difficult situations and strong feelings. And you likely have noticed that your loved one has a slower reaction time. You might see this in their driving. You might even see it in your conversations. It just takes a little bit longer for them to respond when you ask a question or give an instruction. And lastly, you also probably have noticed a loss of initiative. It's really common for a person living with dementia to lose the ability to initiate a task or an activity. Their brain just isn't telling them what to do any longer. And so what do they do instead? Either sit sedentary, or maybe you see them following you around constantly because you look like you know what you're doing. Next. And there are also behavioral changes experienced by the person living with dementia. Ever noticed your loved one's reluctance to try new things, go new places, or meet new people? It's hard to go outside of the comfort zone, and that zone gets smaller and smaller as these diseases progress. Have you seen uncharacteristic mood swings? Maybe your loved one is acting jealous or suspicious. Maybe you've noticed hoarding, rummaging, pacing. Their behavior becomes more socially inappropriate, and it might be more uncomfortable for you to take them places or be with others who don't know or understand their diagnosis. The person living with dementia will often avoid situations where they feel like failure might occur. They may make excuses or just downright resist. And some people also experience delusions or hallucinations. But I want to make sure to make the point that behavioral changes are not your loved one doing things on purpose. They're not trying to make you mad. They're not trying to be manipulative. These are changes in the brain that are manifesting themselves in these sorts of symptoms. Next. So do you feel that your health has suffered due to your care responsibilities? If you answered yes, you're in good company with about 35% of other caregivers who feel the same way. Caregivers so often put their own health needs aside, not making their regular doctor's appointments, not getting enough sleep, enough exercise, not eating well, etc. Twice as many caregivers of those with dementia indicate substantial emotional, physical, or financial difficulties compared to caregivers of someone without dementia. Caregivers have higher levels of depression, stress, and frustration. Am I preaching to the choir yet? And they also have increased risk for harmful behaviors like alcohol abuse. They're in worse health. They have lower levels of self-care and have increased mortality, which means they die sooner. So there's some heavy stuff there. Next. So you're having a difficult day. You're experiencing some of the things that I just mentioned. You're stressed. What can you do? I say you because who can change? Can the person living with dementia change their behavior or change what's happening in their brains? No. You are the only person who can change. So now let me share a few tips that I've learned from caregivers that may help you too. Next. The first tip, quit taking it personally. So think of the acronym Q-tip. Q-tips aren't just for ears. Q-tip, quit taking it personally. If you remember nothing else about caregiving advice, try to heed this acronym. The person's dementia is changing their brain and affecting their personality, their judgment, decision-making, behavior. Their behavior isn't a reflection of your relationship. It's most likely a means of communication. It's a message of, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I don't understand what's going on, or any other host of concerns. So try not to take their actions personally. And remember, it's often just a way of communicating needs. They're trying to make sense of their reality as best they can. A few, don'ts. Don't expect your loved one to think or act reasonably or rationally. Don't argue. Have realistic expectations of what your loved one can do. Even with your patience, even when your patience is being tried, do your best to stay calm. You getting upset will only escalate the situation. So try to focus on showing your loved one that you care about how they're feeling. Start with the truth, but you might need to consider therapeutic fibbing in some situations. Next. And the second tip, find your own comfort. As a caregiver, a lot of your role revolves around making your loved one comfortable, making them their favorite meal, playing their favorite songs, things like that. But when is the last time you've done any of those things for yourself? Even if you can't manage it all the time, make sure you include some time for your own favorites too. Make your favorite dessert with your meal, or throw a few of your favorite songs on the playlist. Take some time to make both of you comfortable, and that's going to be a win for everyone. It helps to prevent burnout for you, and it also, take advantage of those opportunities to refill your tank. You have to have some joy in your life. You have to have some things that keep you going and bring you comfort. So be sure to refill your own tank. Next. Find a little humor in your day. It can be really hard to see the glass as half full when your day has started with battles, your loved one, trouble getting up and getting dressed, they don't want to eat breakfast, they're refusing their meds, they won't take a shower, they kicked out the latest home care aide, all kinds of struggles that happen. You finally get some clothes on them, and they end up going to the grocery store with you in a polka dot shirt and plaid pants. There are two ways that you can handle that situation. You can race through the store, hoping no one will notice your loved one's outfit, or you can remind yourself that your loved one is clean and warm and safe and at least fully dressed. So mission accomplished. Give them their favorite striped hat to wear, tell them they look beautiful, and really try to live in the moment. Find that little bit of humor, celebrate those accomplishments, and just be in the moment together. Next. The fourth tip, find support in your caregiving role. It's so easy when you're caught up in your caregiving role to assume all responsibilities for yourself. This shirt has to be ironed in a certain way and put in a closet in a certain place. How many times have you said to yourself, well, no one else will do this right? Or it's quicker, or easier, or better to just do it myself. And that might in fact be true, but is it worth your own health and sanity? There's no such thing as a perfect caregiver. So stop striving for perfection. Let go of the pressures and the expectations. You need support in your caregiving role. A support group is a great place to meet people in similar circumstances and learn new strategies for caregiving. Let others help you. And if you don't know where to find a support group near you, I'd recommend calling your local area agency on aging, and they'd be able to put you in touch with lots of different support groups. A day center can provide a safe place for your loved one during the day while you're out taking care of daily tasks. Home care can be a way to provide help for your loved one, when it's become too challenging for you, but still be in the home. And if they put that shirt in the wrong place, at least it's clean and it's in the closet. Don't sweat the small stuff. And do find a doctor who will listen to you and partner with you on your own health to allow you to continue on this caregiving journey. We know it's not an easy thing, but working with a really good doctor for you can really be a good source of support. Next. Patience, patience, patience. If there's one word to remember, it's patience. Some days are going to be trying. They're going to be hard. Your loved one is asking the same question over and over, and there are only so many times you'll be able to respond calmly. So think about taking a step back and remember your patience. Maybe you need more than just a step back. Maybe you need a real break, a break in another room. Take some deep breaths. Count to 30. Find some way to help center yourself, ground yourself. Maybe you have somebody come in to help give you a break. Who might that person be? Is it a home care agency? Is it a family member? Is it a friend or a neighbor or a volunteer or someone from your faith community? Who could step in and give you a break? If it's for an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours, something to really give you that break that you need as a caregiver. And have realistic expectations. Don't expect your loved one to remember what you say. This is a disease in their brain. Remember, you're the only one that can change. And patience can help you get through those really tough situations. You're going to face lots of things that try your patience, but again, take a break, take a step back, try to have a little bit of perspective on the situation. And maybe it helps to remember the reasons that you started caregiving in the first place. What were those reasons? And hopefully that will bring you some patience in those really difficult moments. Next. So I'd like to leave you with a quote that might speak to you when you're having a really difficult caregiving day. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Isn't that true? There will be difficult times ahead. You've experienced some difficult times. But how can we look at the positive side? How can we learn to dance in the rain? How can we appreciate those moments and find some joy and some comfort in those moments? So actually now we can turn it over to the Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Lindsey. So yeah, we really wanted to do something a little bit different this time and leave lots and lots of time open for questions. We'd like to thank you all in advance for submitting your questions. The advanced ones, at least, Lindsey was able to take a look at them and kind of organize them into themes. So we're just going to kind of cover these themes and hopefully be able to get through as many as we can today, in addition to any questions you'll be asking as we are live right now. So right off the bat, we have a listener whose mother has dementia and doesn't really know what to expect as the dementia progresses. So I know in kind of the beginning of the presentation, you kind of went through the different aspects, changes that may occur. And so in terms of question, I was wondering if you could maybe speak to how this might appear in terms of a time frame. Is there a time frame? Do certain symptoms manifest themselves earlier than others in terms of the months and the years as something like dementia might progress?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, again, each form of dementia is a little bit different. Each disease might manifest in a different way. It starts in a different part of the brain, and each person is different. But in some forms of dementia, you might notice certain things earlier than others. So, for example, with Alzheimer's disease, you tend to see that short-term memory loss being one of the first warning signs. When someone is repeating themselves a lot, they ask you the same question over and over, they don't remember like really important things that have happened that day or the day before or the week before, that starts to be the first warning sign for most people who have Alzheimer's disease. If someone has a frontal temporal form of dementia, you tend to see more of the kind of personality and mood changes earlier on, difficulty regulating emotion, kind of losing that social filter of what to say and not say. And with Lewy body dementia, which is another one of the most common forms, you might notice some things like visual hallucinations, big kind of swings in attention span and kind of attention level, and maybe even some Parkinsonian type features. And then there's a number of other forms of dementia as well, but those are the most common. And as each disease progresses and starts affecting more and more of the brain, different parts of the brain, you're going to start seeing lots of other symptoms. And these are global diseases of the brain. So in the end, they're all going to sort of look the same. By the end of each disease process, they're going to be affecting, the whole brain at that point. And so when you're talking about like a time frame, it really varies, again, depending on the disease, that person's health condition, their age. But one statistic I can share with you, for example, with Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia, the average life expectancy after a diagnosis has been made is around 8 years, but the range of what's possible is actually really huge. Some people might live just 2 or 3 years. Other people live more than 20 years with Alzheimer's disease. So 8 is by no means like a hard and fast rule. It's just when you average everybody out, that's the average life expectancy after a diagnosis has been made. And so how would you know how long your loved one is going to live? No one has a crystal ball, but one thing that a doctor might do is look at how quickly they've already progressed. How quickly have they gone from sort of early stage to middle stage disease? And that might be an indication of how quickly they'll go from middle to late stage disease. So it's not exact by any means, but it might at least give you some idea of what the future looks like.
Sure, sure. I'd actually like to come back to kind of maybe the long-term care aspect of it, but I do want to continue on with kind of disease progression. We have one pretty specific question. It's a rather important question, but we have a caregiver who's taking care of his mother, and she has dementia. But what is happening is she won't swallow the food she's given. She spits it out, and I guess doesn't seem to realize that it is food. Do you have any advice on how the caregiver might be able to manage the situation?
Yeah, that's something that's really common as these diseases progress. That person, like you said, just maybe doesn't recognize that it is food. That texture in their mouth is just something that's uncomfortable. They don't quite know what to do with it. It's like their brain isn't telling their mouth, what to do any longer, to chew and to move the food, use your tongue to move the food to the back of your throat and to swallow it. And so a person will often either pocket the food in their cheek or they'll spit it out. So in the short term, I would say try giving more smooth type food. I wouldn't give like a leg of chicken anymore. I would do something that's much softer and easier to eat. But I would suggest bringing this up with a physician, and they might recommend an evaluation by a speech therapist, because then they might be able to look and really understand what's going on. There could be lots of reasons that a person spits out food. It could be, tooth pain. There could be some sort of infection that person isn't able to express to you. But maybe, once someone takes a look at it, they could see what's going on, resolve the issue, and then that person might be able to, go back to eating the foods that they really enjoyed. So there's a lot of reasons that might be, so I'd suggest bringing it up with the doctor. But again, in the short term, maybe switching to easier to eat foods, maybe softer, smoother foods, finger foods, and that sort of thing.
Great. And then one more in terms of dementia progression. We have a caregiver who's the person they're providing care for has dementia and is also shuffling when they're walking. So they're wondering if this might be a cognitive issue related to the dementia. Could it be muscle weakness? Could it be both? And then how might they best address this in terms of maybe a walker, a cane, or some kind of other assistive device?
Sure. So that's something a lot of people don't realize, is that there can be mobility issues that go along with dementia. So many people think dementia is just about like memory loss, not remembering other people's names and things like that. But really, these are diseases that start affecting every part of our brain. And one part of the brain, for example, does control like our movement, our balance, our gait pattern, the way that we walk. And so this could be the result of, changes in the brain. It could have something to do with muscle weakness. We do, with dementia, people lose that ability to initiate things like getting up and going outside for a walk, things that do keep their muscles strong. So that could certainly be a piece of it. And so I would say, in this case, it would also be a good idea, both to talk with the doctor about it, but then to get an evaluation from a physical therapist or an occupational therapist to try to understand, what's the root cause here, and then what sorts of things can be done to bring that person back up to, the level that they were able to function before, or at least as close as possible. And that might involve a cane, a rolling walker, a two-wheel walker, or something else. But really starting to work with some professionals to get to the bottom of it and figure out a good plan for that person would be a good idea.
Great, great. And then I also just wanted to quickly mention, I think it's related, that we recently did a webinar on, it's maybe not titled not exactly accurately, but dementia proofing your home. But it's just about kind of simple, not too expensive steps that caregivers can take. Just, I'm sure it's kind of old hat for a professional like you, but just being mindful about carpets, obstructions, kind of signaling what rooms are for. So that might also be an interesting resource for the caregiver in terms of how to also make the house a little bit more easy to navigate for the person if they are starting to have some mobility issues. One frequent question that we found, it was kind of variation on a theme, is managing and maintaining calm when dealing with these the challenging dementia behaviors. They're very common, as we know, and you've already alluded to this in terms of changing your own behavior and some of the other tips you gave. So, in particular, in terms of, say, asking the same question over and over, maybe opening a window when it's very cold outside, constantly or even resistance to showering, do you have any maybe specific kind of tips or strategies a caregiver might use in terms of being able to manage both the behavior and their kind of understandable exhaustion to being confronted with these behaviors?
Sure. So I'll give you kind of some overall tips because everyone sees different kinds of behaviors in your loved one, and then I'll give you some specific ideas for the questions that were asked for this webinar. So generally, when you're thinking about these kind of behavioral symptoms and they feel like a problem, first often think about, are they really a problem? Are they dangerous to that person or someone else? Is it hurting someone? Is it affecting other people in some way? Or is it something that's just kind of annoying, like the repetitive questions? So for repetitive questions, for example, as much as possible, I would say just answer like it's the first time you heard it. I would take the phrase, don't you remember, out of your vocabulary entirely. If that person remembered, they would not ask you again. Again, I'll remind you, this is not someone doing this on purpose. They're not trying to make you mad or manipulate you. It's just a change in their brain. So first thinking, is the behavior a problem? And if you decide that it is a problem, okay, now we want to look at the behavior and think of it as a form of communication. What are they trying to express with this behavior that they're not able to get out in words? What does their reality look like? Where do they think they are? Who do they think they're with? What kind of situation do they think they're in? So you start to become a detective. You're looking at like the who, what, why, when, where, to try to figure out what's going on, both in your reality and from that person's perspective. You want to, eliminate any possible physical causes. So maybe that person is actually having some pain, or they're hungry, or there's some sort of a medical condition happening. So you kind of work those out first, talk with the doctor. Then you want to also look at emotional needs. Is this person feeling lonely or scared or sad, or, are they just not feeling connected to other people? And then you want to think about, how do I respond? So is there a way I can prevent the behavior? So I'm going to take the example of the person who opens up the window on a cold night. Okay, what can we do? So just quickly, not knowing the person, my first guess would be this person is hot. So they're opening up a window to cool off. So how can we prevent that? Maybe we put a lighter blanket on the bed, or thinner pajamas on, or we put a fan in the room, or we find some other way to maybe prevent that behavior that we find undesirable. Or maybe there's a way we can redirect the person. There's something that is bothering them, maybe something that we would prefer that they're doing. How can we redirect? How can we shift their attention to something else that will be more enjoyable or more pleasant for them? And maybe we just need to validate their emotion. Maybe it's that person who is always asking for their mother, and mother can't come back. Mother passed away 30 years ago. But maybe just validating the love that they have for their mother and talking about the wonderful ways, that they connected with their mom, the way their mom made them feel safe, and mom's favorite, the chocolate chip cookies she always used to make, or, then you kind of like, you're validating the emotion, you're validating that relationship, but then you're redirecting. You're taking that conversation to a more pleasant place rather than, when is mom coming to get me? It's talking about all of those wonderful holiday traditions that moms, started with our family. And you really want to play up their likes and avoid any dislikes. So for example, if someone is resisting their shower, which is what one person asked about, is there anything about that experience that they do like? Maybe mom has always really loved, like frilly girly things, having scented lotions and perfumes and fancy soaps and plush towels and things like that. How can we play that up? Rather than, okay, we need to take a shower now, maybe it's, spending a little time in the spa. Or how do we avoid dislikes? Maybe that person really, really dislikes being in a shower, with the shower curtain closed, with the water coming down on them. Maybe it's scary, it's claustrophobic, something's going on. So how can we avoid the things that are bothersome? Can we do a bath? Can we do a sponge bath instead? Maybe we just do kind of a bed bath. Maybe today we kind of wash the arms with a washcloth. Tomorrow we do the legs. The next day we do the back. And we can sort of meet the overall goal of getting done what we need to get done to help keep that person safe and healthy, but trying to avoid the things that are really causing these problematic behavioral symptoms. So those are just a few examples that I hope might help some of the listeners out there.
Perfect, great. Yeah, thanks so much. I certainly like that kind of triage idea in terms of just kind of sort through what can maybe be managed on a personal level in terms of annoyance, and then what really needs to get solved, and the whole idea of kind of being a detective and trying to get into the whole get into the rabbit hole of what their perception is, and how it might be different than what we're experiencing today. Let us see. Okay, we have another common theme submitted among the questions, and this is kind of the home versus long-term care setting. And I have a whole bunch of questions on this, so I might just ask them all at once, rapid fire, and we'll see how what you think. So in particular, what might be the reasons to opt for a long-term care facility over, say, providing care at home, which would also be, I guess, when is it time, when is it time for me to place the person I'm caring for in a facility? What does that moment, what might that moment look like? And then if the decision is made that a facility might be the best thing for them, is there anything that a caregiver can do to help ease the transition to the person who's going to be making the move? And then also we've gotten a couple questions on people who have decided they've gotten to the point where they need to place someone, a loved one, or someone they're caring for, but the person is really, unhappy. They might, ask to come home. They might call and, ask if they could come home. And then I guess finally, as maybe kind of a wrap up on this theme, is how might caregiving change once the person they were caring for at home has gone to a facility? How might that look different than care at home from a caregiver's kind of daily experience?
Okay, sure. So with dementia, these are a set of mostly progressive diseases, and so that means there will be more care needed over time. As much as we hope that things will just kind of stay the same forever, that they're never going to get any worse, that's just not reality for diseases like Alzheimer's, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and all these other forms of dementia. There will be more care needed over time. And so as people need more care, when it becomes more than just short-term memory problems, it becomes physical care. That person just needing help with everything from getting dressed in the morning, using the bathroom, taking a shower, even, like someone had mentioned with the shuffling and difficulty with walking, it just becomes more and more. And so this can be both physically really strenuous, taxing work for the caregiver. You're physically helping someone with a lot of tasks. Maybe this is a spouse, and maybe you're like a 100-pound lady and you're caring for a 250-pound man. Imagine the difficulty of that. And not only is it physically strenuous, it can be really mentally and emotionally taxing. If you are a primary caregiver in the home and you are with this person 24/7, imagine the toll that this takes on your mental health and your emotional well-being. So for many families, the decision is made to move to a long-term care community when it just no longer works to care for that person at home. Maybe they need too much physical care. Maybe they're up most of the night. The caregiver doesn't get a chance to get any sleep because they're caregiving during the day and they have other tasks to take care of around the house. They're managing, kind of everything within the household, and they also don't get to sleep at night when their loved one isn't asleep. So that can be kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to say. Maybe there are behavioral symptoms that start to make the person living with dementia a danger to themselves or to other people. Whether it's sort of a behavioral outburst, like aggressive sort of symptoms, pushing or biting or, things like that. Or maybe it's something in the home. Maybe the physical layout of the home isn't conducive. Maybe there are a lot of stairs and this has become a real issue for that person. Maybe the home isn't handicap accessible and this person, has a walker to get around or a wheelchair. And maybe the caregiver health is just deteriorating. As I was mentioning earlier on in this webinar, caregiving takes such a toll on caregiver health. And so it's not uncommon for caregivers to put off their own doctor's appointments and not take care of themselves, and then just get to this point where they can't do it anymore. They can't keep themselves going. They can't properly care for their loved one anymore, and that something needs to change. So those are some common reasons that someone may start looking at moving to a long-term care facility. So once that decision is made, how can a caregiver sort of prepare the person before the move? So I would say first, make sure that the care facility, so I'm assuming you've done all of your homework, you've checked out multiple facilities, you've, asked all kinds of questions, you've sort of observed what's going on, you understand the finances. Then how do you prepare? So make sure that the facility knows all of the important details about your loved one. Not just their medical record, not just their diagnosis and their med list. What do they need to know? What are the things your loved one really likes, or what are the things that really irritate them? What are some of the things they're most proud of from their lives? What are those things that bring them, peace or spiritual support? What are the things they love to do, that really just kind of strike a chord with them? So make sure that the community has all of this information, so from day one, they can really be, kind of playing up to the strengths and interests of your loved one and establishing that relationship right away. Another thing is to set the person's room up beforehand. So before the person moves in, set the room up with their familiar belongings, things that are special to them. Hang the pictures that were in their bedroom wall, hang those, now on their new bedroom wall. Take their special quilt, put up photos of the family. If there's anything, a favorite robe or a favorite whatever, make sure that those things are there. So on the day that that person moves in, it looks familiar and homey. Now, another thing is, on the day that someone moves in, you might try to participate in a favorite activity together. So if you're at a community where they have musical programs and exercises and classes and all kinds of things going on, try to plan ahead of time, what's going to be happening that day, and is it something that my loved one would really, really enjoy? And that might be a good way to transition together. Maybe you both go to the musical concert together. You have an enjoyable experience together. And then also, really validating the concerns of your loved one. So, on the first day there, it's, not uncommon that someone might be a little bit scared or agitated or, just feeling worried about what's going to happen. And so rather than try to reason with someone and explain to them, the 20th time why they're there, just validating their concerns, that you love them, that you care for them, that you're always going to be, with them, you're traveling this journey together, finding whatever it is that really helps reassure that person. So, okay, what do you do if the person in the facility wants to go home? They keep asking to go home. That's very likely. That will probably happen. Not with everyone. Sometimes people will move and it's like they have no recognition that they're in a new place. But it is quite common that a person will, want to go home. Why can't I go home? So I just want to let you know that. Be upfront, be realistic so that you can mentally and emotionally prepare for that. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but just be prepared that it might. You might consider asking a good friend to stop in and see your loved one. Many times communities will kind of discourage those close family members from coming for a few days or a week. But maybe there's somebody else who could stop in and see your loved one who'd be sort of a familiar, friendly face for them, and then also kind of be able to report back to you, firsthand how your loved one is doing. And it's really okay, and I encourage for you caregivers to call the staff any time of the day or in the middle of the night to ask how your loved one is doing. So maybe it's day 1, day 2, day 3 that they've been there. Maybe you haven't been visiting, but that doesn't mean that you can't know what's going on. So call the staff, call and ask how things are going, call at 2 a.m. whenever you need to. And that's also a good opportunity for you to get to know the staff and to build, that relationship and that just open communication between both of you. And also, I just want to mention that, there will be an adjustment period. It's really common that it might take someone, 2 or 3 weeks or even up to 2 or 3 months to really adjust, and to kind of stop asking for, I want to go home, why can't I go home, that sort of thing. But just remind yourself why you made the decision for that person to be there. There was a reason. It's not something that people do lightly, to make that decision lightly. So thinking about, why did I make this decision in the first place? And just reminding yourself that, and maybe finding other people who can support and validate you in that decision and in those feelings around it. And then kind of the last, I think, part of this question was, what might life look like for me as a caregiver after my loved one's in a facility? And it is a big change. It's huge. That's one of the most common things that I've been hearing recently from the caregivers in one of the support groups that I facilitate. And so it's kind of two-pronged from what I hear from these caregivers. There's this relief in knowing that your loved one is taken care of. There's just this kind of weight off of your shoulders. You finally get a chance to, one lady was telling me how for the first 3 months she slept like 15 hours a night, just kind of making up for all these nights, months and months that she wasn't able to get adequate sleep. So there's some relief there. But then there's this other side of things where you're not used to being alone. I mean, specifically if someone had been a 24/7 caregiver, especially a spouse, now you might be alone. You're in a house. You haven't been alone in that house since you got married 50 years ago. And so that's a big change, just not knowing what to do with yourself. You're still a caregiver and you're still extremely important, but your role just changes a little bit. You get to be a little bit more of that spouse or the adult child or the friend or the sibling without having to worry about every single day-to-day task. But you're still a caregiver. Now your role is, to visit, to share information about your loved one with the staff and really help them understand your loved one as an individual and as a person. And also to be in touch with the staff for things, like changes in your loved one, how the routine is going, just sort of kind of overseeing care in a different way from when you're at home. There's no perfect caregiver out there. And certainly people who are caring for your loved one who have not known them for 50 years are not going to do it the same as you. And so to expect that is kind of setting yourself up for disappointment. But recognize that there are also people who've cared for lots of different folks in different situations, and they have maybe education and skill sets in areas that you don't. And so even though it's not going to be the same, it doesn't mean that it's worse. It's just different, and your role is different.
Perfect. Thanks so much. That was sorry. It was a bit of a big question. So I really appreciate you kind of going through all the aspects of it. And yeah, I think a lot of people. I mean, it is, as you mentioned, it's such a big move. I think it might, people might scratch their heads, or it might almost be paralyzing to try and think of, how's this going to work? What's going to happen when they're there, and then maybe expecting that, kind of the end. Something to be a little bit different, and then realizing, as you mentioned, the reality that maybe it is good, but maybe there's some aspects of the person that caregiving that they were providing, maybe they might even miss or feel that it's really feel that there's a big change has happened, and it might not be just all relief and all all upside. Family Caregiver Alliance, we do have, Lindsey basically kind of went through an entire like a mini webinar on long-term care settings, but we do, for those who are interested in reading over and maybe spending a little more time, we do have 5 tip sheets on, we call it residential care options, so essentially kind of these long-term care settings, whether it be nursing home or memory care, things like that. And we also have a recent webinar, Residential Care Options 101. So either of those would be on our website if anyone's interested in reading or listening to a little bit more about that topic. So to switch gears a little bit, and this came up briefly in another answer you gave us, we have a listener who is having trouble moving her mother out of her bed, and I guess in other situations, perhaps maybe helping her into a shower or the bathroom, and there is a sizable weight difference between the person who needs help moving, who is 50 pounds heavier than her adult daughter, and it's actually, I guess, she already has developed sciatica, which is of course not a good thing. So I was wondering if you had any advice on how she might learn or get information about kind of transferring techniques and certainly in terms of helping to minimize the physical impact on her in terms of providing care for her mother.
Absolutely. So, this is a little bit difficult to explain or demonstrate since we are in a webinar, but my main piece of advice here is, again, to utilize the resource of like a physical therapist. So that means talking to the doctor and getting an order for therapy, which Medicare Part B will cover. And so learning from someone one-on-one, because each person is different. So you already have some, sciatic nerve pain. Your mother has, maybe abilities or inabilities that are different from someone else. So when you're working with someone like a physical therapist, they can teach you. That's one of the goals that they can set is caregiver training. So once they sort of leave the, they've graduated from their PT goals, that's one of the goals that they can meet is to get you ready to take over as the caregiver. And so they can teach you some proper moving techniques, how to balance your weight, and even some tricks, about maybe, putting different kinds of maybe like a sheet under your mom, or doing different kinds of things, a slide board that can help move her around a little bit better and to save you. And if it seems that it's just not possible, maybe for a period of time, your nerve pain is just getting in the way of caregiving, you might look at other options. Do we need to hire someone to come into the home? Is there a friend or a family member who can come in and help? But definitely reaching out to other resources like talking to the doctor, therapy, getting other people involved are going to be really important for you to take care of yourself and to keep your mom safe.
Definitely, yeah. We actually have a program that we run in the San Francisco Bay Area. We call it Caregiver College, but one of the little modules is is kind of a workshop on transferring. So it can be relatively. Lindsey mentioned some like a slide board, a transfer board, sheets, or even there's a thing called like a gait belt that kind of looks like those big martial arts belts. They're big and they're thick and they're wide, and so there definitely are some ways to help, at least in these transferring situations that don't necessarily have to require a lot of money, but certainly, as Lindsey mentioned, you really want to be able to learn from a professional. And there are, of course, as you mentioned, they're kind of set up to be able to offer that education to the public, and so that's a great resource to think about. Now we have, it's going to be probably more relevant in the coming months, but I'm sure a lot of our caregivers would certainly, if we were in a live audience, nod when they would hear this question. But could you give some advice or tips on how to handle well-meaning family members who might arrive and get, in the caregiver's exact words, often give ill-informed and unwanted advice in terms of coming and saying, well, you should do this or that, or why don't you do this, or Uncle Jim looks fine.
Oh yes, I'm sure that most caregivers have heard that, especially if there are other family members involved. So first I would try to advise, don't react to the message that's being given, but try to think about the background and the intentions of the messenger. Is this someone who really just is caring and really wants to help, but doesn't have enough information, maybe doesn't have a good understanding of how things are actually going to really be helpful to you? So is this just a lack of information? Is this something where if they came and spent some time with you or with your loved one, that they might understand better? Maybe they live far away and they're just not quite understanding the disease, and maybe they could just learn a little bit more about the progression of something like dementia, specific forms of dementia. Sometimes people, maybe they're not so well-meaning, they try to use this advice as a way to kind of take you down a peg. And so for those people, I would say, don't bother getting into arguments and debates with those people. Just surround yourself with people who are supportive. Other caregivers are a great place to start. Consider going to a caregiver support group, because everyone experiences this, and talk with them about how they handle some of this unwanted advice. And really, a good purpose of a support group is to get validation in the things that you are doing, that you are making good choices, that you are informed, that you know about your resources out there. And so when others give you unwanted advice, you can feel confident that you've made choices that you feel are best for your loved one, and you can kind of let this unwanted advice roll off your shoulders. And if it is that caring person, that they're really trying to be useful, they just maybe don't know what you need. So consider preemptively kind of either asking for their advice to help them feel good, help them feel useful and validated, or give them very specific ways that they can be more active in care. Give them a role, give them a job to do. Think about what their strengths are, what their thought process is with all this advice that they're giving. Maybe they live far away and they're calling you and they're telling you about all these things they found online that you should check out. Well, maybe let them know what you really need. Well, we're good with this, but we could really use some help with ordering our groceries and having them delivered, or finding a neurologist or something else. So give that person a really specific task to do where they actually can be useful.
Perfect. Thanks so much. We're definitely going to revisit this. We're going to have a webinar on managing caregiving during the holidays. But I appreciate in your answer, you were able to answer another question we had about being able to engage people in terms of when caregivers are looking to, when they've made the decision that they're okay receiving help, which is great. Everyone, of course, always encourages them to do so. That to make that concrete, to actually say, well, for all the people who are offering help, it's kind of an abstract thing, as you mentioned. Just say, that's great. Could you help me with X, Y, and Z? And then people can really, focus on something that they can help out with, and really actually be able to ease that burden for the caregivers in a real concrete way.
Exactly. And if I can tag on to that, so many times caregivers might hear from friends or family, well, just let me know if there's anything I can do. Give me a call if you need any help. But they don't actually take that person up on their offer. But start doing that. Start taking people up on their offer, even if it's maybe earlier on in the disease process and you are doing okay and you don't need this extra help right now. But start letting other people into your life. Start letting your loved one become more accustomed to having other people involved in life. Start getting used to taking a break. Start getting used to giving people specific jobs to do. Maybe you have a list by the phone or a list in your purse. So when somebody calls and says, well, let me know if I can help, you've got, 5 different ideas written down, and you can offer a couple of ideas to them. Well, if you could bring us dinner one day a week, that would just really help me. Or if you could drop off a bag of groceries after you get your own, that would help me a lot. And have some really specific ideas so when someone does offer, you can give them a job to do. And if you're trying to recruit help from family members or friends in the community, and you really want their support, you want their help, but they're not kind of jumping in on their own, think about the strengths that they have. What makes them feel good? What are they really good at? And maybe you can ask them to be involved in a way that kind of fits in with their comfort level and really plays up to their strengths. So maybe they're really good with money. They've got a job in finance of some capacity. Maybe they can help you, do your taxes, or they can help you with the, paying bills each month. Or if maybe you've got a grandkid in the family who's got their own car and doesn't have a summer job, maybe they can help take grandpa to, the senior center or to, the church meeting or wherever. So really think about what's that person's capacity, what are their strengths, what do they feel good about, and how can we get them involved to really expand our circle of people who can help us, and really help us care for this loved one who we probably want to keep at home as long as possible. And to successfully do that, we're going to need other people involved.
Great, thank you. We have a question, actually, that's a great question about kind of financial security. Caregivers are wondering who might the legal specialist, or who would be the person to see to try and safeguard a parent with dementia from these kind of financial scams. We know, unfortunately, that criminals love to target older Americans. So who might be the expert or the individual or the profession they might consult to try and safeguard the finances of a parent with dementia?
Mm-hmm. Well, so yes, as dementia is changing that person's brain, their ability to do things like manage finances is going to be impaired. The short-term memory is impaired, judgment is impaired. You've got lots of things going on that even if that person can have a pretty normal conversation with you, doesn't mean that they have the capacity to properly do things like manage their finances or be alert to people who are taking advantage of them, scams, or even family members or neighbors who are taking advantage. So you do want someone, hopefully that financial power of attorney, hopefully there's one of those in place, or some sort of primary caregiver involved, more and more when it comes to finances. And maybe at first it's just kind of looking over the checkbook and the bank statements every month to make sure everything looks okay. Maybe the next step is we write the bills out together. Maybe eventually you're writing the checks and that person is just kind of supervising you, to help them feel involved. And you're going to have these kind of gradual steps of where someone else is taking over the finances. But even early on, I would say to be involved, to be kind of overseeing the finances, be alert to any kind of red flags, changes in spending patterns, because those sorts of things aren't going to get better. They're going to get worse. There are some professions out there. I mean, some people may work with like a financial advisor. That's not going to help on these day-to-day kinds of money things and scams, but just to look at the larger financial picture can be useful. In some places they have like money managers, people whose job is to come out and help with things like paying bills each month. Sometimes like county governments might offer that as a service to people who have a memory loss, dementia, or a disability. Sometimes they're privately paid individuals, but they can help kind of oversee those like monthly expenditures. And so that might be a couple of resources that you reach out to.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Yeah, it's really an unfortunate thing that we have to, these are some of the considerations that family have to really be careful about. But thank you for the advice on that one. The hour's really flown by. I think we have time for definitely one, maybe two more questions. So I will try with two more. In terms of caregiving for parents, say for an adult child, do you have any advice on kind of how they might separate their feelings when caring for a parent, going from, that kind of maybe not unnatural, but the unexpected role reversal of someone who cared for you when you were a child, and then you became kind of equals as adults, and then that was kind of expected to last, and now maybe it's kind of flipped again, and now you're kind of providing the care for them. Do you have any advice on how they might kind of wrap their head around this, kind of the reality of dementia caregiving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so hard. That's something that so many people experience. And my advice would be sort of two-pronged. Number one, to find some support among other adult children who are going through some of these same things, whether it's finding a support group of, specifically adult children, or that a lot of people who go there are adult children, or maybe you have a friend, you have, a high school or college friend who's going through some of the same things with one of their parents, that just somebody you can talk with about it. I mean, even if you have like a spouse, it's a little bit different. If it's not their parent, who parented them as a child, it's going to feel different than if you're talking to another adult child caregiver of someone. So finding some support among your peers is going to be useful. And then also, like the caller was saying, was to try to be more objective. We get kind of all of our feelings all wrapped up, and we can't help it. We have these personal histories, we have love, we have maybe even complicated, emotions and just things from the past that kind of get in the way of our caregiving. But trying to step back and look at things more objectively if possible. Like really what's the right decision, or understanding that, my parents' just capacity to make decisions and to think reasonably is changing. And so I, have to take more of the lead on some of these decisions and responsibilities at home. And you can find other professionals out there to help too, if you have the resources available to find care managers or other, people who can kind of help with some of those things. And you might even consider seeing like a therapist if, again, if that's something that's available to you, to process some of these changes in your relationship, additional stressors in your life. Sometimes people find that useful too.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. Well, unfortunately, it looks like we're out of time for this one. The hour really flew by. So I'd like to thank you all for participating in today's webinar presented by Lindsey Vajpeyi. FCA webinars are a free and continuing series. You can find more information about our next one on our website. Thanks again, Lindsey, for joining us today. We really appreciated, I think, having her as our kind of Ask the Expert for the afternoon. And it's not so easy to have to answer all these questions kind of rapid fire. So we do appreciate you spending the time with us this afternoon and sharing your great expertise with us. So it's very appreciated. So, and again, of course, thank you all for taking time out of your day. We understand you've got a lot going on, so an hour is a big ask, so we do appreciate it. So this webinar is concluded. We hope to see you all for the next one, and have a great afternoon.